to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. And well, no Philadelphia Union MLS games for the next month. But you know what we do have? We do have the Leagues Cup. And I told you guys, I do not want to cover this tournament. But if you guys want, we definitely will cover the tournament. But talking with people around Subaru Park, I get the feeling that Leagues Cup is not high on people's bucket list. And that's why partially we're bringing fans on. I want to get people's thoughts on Leagues Cup. We can talk about the Wrexham friendly against Union 2. We can talk about the Philadelphia Union season. We can talk about Messi and friends down in Miami, because I'm sure once that Inter Miami game happens against Cruz Azul this Friday, Messi's debut, everybody's calling it. I'm sure that's going to be the talk around town is Messi. So I feel like eventually we're probably going to be forced to talk about Messi on the podcast. But without further ado, I'm joined first time on the podcast, another Marylander, Nick Adcock. Nick, how you doing?
Hello, man. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Very excited to be on the Free Kick podcast.
There we go.
Long time listener. And I'm sure I would get in a lot of flack if I didn't clarify that I'm from Philadelphia originally and then moved to Maryland. Yep. Yeah, I know. Very, very upsetting, but I moved to Baltimore 2017 and hung around ever since because I loved it so much. But definitely from Philadelphia originally, so it's got to make a little asterisk there.
Well, you know, people listening to this would rather you be from Philadelphia. I mean, they're probably going to be mad that you moved out of Philadelphia to Maryland. But, you know, people are going to be happy that, you know, you're not a Marylander, you're a Philadelphian. So I think people are going to cut you some slack. So, look, learning things all the time on this podcast. So I just assumed, right, that because I knew you lived in Maryland, that you always grew up in Maryland. So that's what this podcast is about, is always learning. But I guess that kind of explains a little bit how you became a Union fan from being from Philadelphia, right?
Yep. And the important note there is that what brought me to Maryland in the end was that Drexel did not offer me any money for grad school, and UMBC did. So fell in love with Maryland real quick. So yeah, but I'm from Lower Moreland High School originally. It's like, you know, about 15 minutes from Abington, north outside in the suburbs. It was really interesting because I was taking a few steps back. I was actually born in England, and you know, soccer is just a massive cultural thing over there. My dad is obsessed. I was born right outside of Cambridge, and so, you know, my entire family over there is a Cambridge United fan, so I fell in love with them. I remember being, you know, probably 3 years old in the standing section when my dad held me over the bar so I could see the game properly. And, the only reason that I know that Cambridge United is currently in the third division is because it's the same as Oxford. So when Steve went over, I started following them a little bit more because I was like, oh, cool, Oxford, maybe they'll play Cambridge at some point. I never actually got to catch the game, but definitely I fell in love with soccer in that way. But from there, when I remember distinctly when I was in high school, a gym teacher came up to me because she knew that I love soccer and was just like, hey, like, did you know that it was 2009? And she was like, hey, did you know that the MLS is giving like Philadelphia a team? And I was like, really? And just, you know, kind of from there, followed them here and there. But it really wasn't until I went to a few games. And, you know, I remember distinctly it was like Connor Casey era that I was obsessed with Connor Casey back in the day because he was just like a very non-traditional striker that was very aggressive and would just barrel people over, and I always appreciated that, the few games I got to go to. Then in 2019, you know, I started following the team a lot more carefully and stuck with him, you know, and ever since then it's you know, just been an absolute obsession, just constantly on Twitter seeing if there's any Philadelphia news all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, man, Connor Casey days, I mean, you got to go back. I mean, Brian Carroll, obviously the captain. You had Chris Albright on the team, Jack Mack, you had Roger Torres, throwing Sebastian Letou. I guess Union fans would kill me if I didn't mention him. Kleberson at one point. I mean, yeah, we're definitely throwing back the names for all the OG Union fans. I don't know. I feel like, you know, I always mention the OG Union fans on this podcast, and it is cool, like, listening to their stories. And you know it, right? You grew up in the era. The Philadelphia Union back in the day were god awful. And I don't think the newer fans that have come on board realize how bad it was back in the day for the Philadelphia Union. And look, I came on board around 2017, really started getting invested in 2018, 2019 is when I went to my first game. But when the pandemic hit and everything, I had to do my research. I had to look up everything there was about the Philadelphia Union when I was doing my trivia podcast. And Yeah, those were some dark days, right, Nick? And I don't have to remind you or the listeners, but the Union have come a long way since the beginning.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I was much more of a casual fan up until 2019, and somehow I lucked out. It was every game I went to up until they won every game that I saw in person up until they had a friendly against Crystal Palace one summer, and I just was like, oh cool, Crystal Palace, let me get tickets to go see them play the Union. And the Crystal Palace won like 2-1, and I was like walking out, and I was like, wow, it was the first game I've ever seen the Union lost. Just assumed they were pretty good, and then we paid a little bit more attention, and I was like, oh no, this was not some were not the most top tier seasons that they had back in the days.
No, not at all. And I talked about it on the last podcast, right? For people that didn't listen, I talked about how I feel like the newer fan base, are a little bit spoiled with watching last season how the Union, the second half of the season, were blowing out teams 6-0, 7-0. And that really hasn't happened that much this season. Yeah, we had a 4-1 win against Columbus. I feel like we had a 4-1 win someplace in there during the season again, 4-0, maybe something like that. But we're definitely not getting the 6-7-0 score lines. And yeah, I think some newer fans are expecting that the Union do that every single game. And that just doesn't happen in soccer. And even look, MLS Cup, and we don't have to talk about this any more than how I'm going to bring it up. But even that was a high scoring game. 6 goals scored in MLS Cup. That just doesn't happen in finals. Usually you see gritty defenses in a final on both teams. LAFC and the Philadelphia Union were up for that match. And you look at fans like, oh man, the Union aren't scoring. It's time to panic. And we can talk about your panic levels here in a little bit. But I just think it's funny where you look at the OGs where, look, nothing phases them now because they've been through all those hardships. And now you got these newer fans like, what? The Union didn't score 6 goals? That was a terrible game. Like, man, you gotta send some of those older fans back to the golden days where Union fans are saying that's so Union and whatnot. But you talked about it a little bit how you got into the Union. Do you have any memories that really stand out to you for the Union? I mean, it could be something you saw on TV, in person. Maybe you met somebody, being a player, coaching staff member. I mean, anything really stand out to you? You mentioned Connor Casey, I know.
Yeah, it's actually really funny because my favorite game, even to this day, was when I was really, really, really starting to follow the Union consistently. It was the 3-3 tie against LAFC in LA. And I remember turning the game on. It was like 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 it started, right? And I was sitting down to watch it. Was really just trying to get into consistently. I was like, oh, cool, like Brendan Aronson, was coming up. Mark McKenzie really was getting like, starting spot at that time. And I was like, oh, we're probably going to get blown out. LAFC won the Supporters Shield, I think, the previous season. It was like predicted to be like the best team in all of MLS, just like roll everyone over again. And I remember it was, I think the first goal was the Jacob Glesnes goal. And I was just like, I remember just standing up and screaming in my apartment and just thinking my neighbors are like, wow, I was like, I'm crazy right now. And I was like, oh my God. And then that Brendan Aronson scored. And I can't remember who it was other than that, but I remember it just being such an intense game and like addicting. And I don't know anyone who could not watch that game and be like, wow, soccer is not an incredible sport. I remember it was in the second half, Bedoya looked over to Jim and made like a subbing motion. And that's the first time I think I've ever seen that in professional soccer, let alone from Bedoya, right? He's always a workhorse. And if Bedoya was ready to come out because there's such an intense game, the game had to be so good. And so I was like absolutely obsessed since then. I was following them like pretty carefully in the season before when they had the first playoff win against Atlanta. That was a sad game to watch, but it was like that game just instantly just hooked. Absolutely loved it. It was so cool seeing Brendan really just like making a name for himself in that game. Obviously, like I said, the Jacob goal and then his first game. But my favorite player still to this day for the Union is Martinez. 100%. He's absolutely phenomenal. I remember him just getting stomped on and like him bleeding from his face. Not getting too graphic detail on the podcast, of course, but like I remember him just having to change his jersey twice, and I was just like, wow, he is my favorite player. Like you cannot doubt it for a second. You just like he's like this man's first game with the Union when he wasn't even supposed to be the starter in that game when they brought him on originally. It was supposed to be I mispronounced his name. It was Orvek or
something. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think any of us know how to say it. Right? He never played.
Season, yeah. We saw him score a couple goals in preseason, which was exciting. But yeah, no, it was just that intensity to him, that intensity of the game, and just like it was just so addicting, and it would just like gave me like the epitome of like Philadelphia sports. How it was just like stood like they were just punching up. there was like an intensity to it, like, make up for like the money that was spent on players that were brought in with a ton of skill for LAFC. And I just, ever since then, I was like, wow, yeah, no, this is an addicting sport. This is, I'm willing to invest some money for season tickets. I'm willing to buy jerseys. I am willing to drive all the way up from Baltimore to go to Chester, watch games consistently. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy too. That LAFC game was Jose Martinez's first game with the Union. Like you said, he's all bloody, and people fell in love with him. Like, yes, this is a player that embodies Philadelphia. Like, this is a guy we can fall in love with. And look, he's one of the best number 6s in MLS. We've seen him score 2 goals. Like, I remember listening to people in the press box or even fans like, if Jose Martinez scores, do we riot? The same thing they said about Ray Gaddis, right? And Jose Martinez scores his first goal down in Orlando. And then this past weekend, we finally see his first goal at Subaru Park. And I mean, that place went mental. Like, Jose Martinez scored again. Like, this guy, you do not want to get near him at all on the field because he's going to leave a bruise on you. And now we're seeing him add goals. Like, this guy, what can't he do? He's a fantastic
he's
player.
Phenomenal. I'm so happy we've been able to keep him. And I always laugh too, because I remember, following him in preseason a little bit. And then when he showed up to the game, he does like the craziest hairstyle. Like, something about it, I remember, just made him look absolutely insane. And I was just like, oh, okay, cool. We're gonna see what this man can do at the bottom of the diamond, And then he absolutely rocked it the whole game. Has been rocking ever since.
Do you remember, going and talking about the 2020 season, because that LAFC game, we were all excited. Do you remember this? Because the first 2 games were on the road, in Dallas and LA FC, and then we were supposed to have a home game, and I forget who it was supposed to be against, too, because it's been so long. And then COVID obviously happens, and so then we have MLS back. And then the social media team starts getting smart. And I remember, like, they start taking videos of Jose dancing, going to the games and everything, and I'm like, yeah, this guy, like, I cannot wait to get to a game in person and cheer this guy on, cheer as loud as I can, because this guy represents what the Philadelphia Union are all about. And going back to the LAFC game, Sergio Santos, Brendan Aronson, and Jacob Glesnes were the 3 goal scorers. I remember it was going back and forth. The Union scored the first goal, then LAFC, Union again, then LAFC, Union again, LAFC. And it's like, Jesus Christ, these guys cannot hold on to a lead, which we unfortunately saw this year as well, except for MLS Cup, right? Last year we saw the Union do what LAFC did, always come from behind, and then the Union finally took the lead. And okay, second time I'm mentioning on the podcast, we don't have to talk about it anymore. But yeah, that 2020 season was a crazy season, and first time the Union actually won some silverware, winning the Supporters Shield, and then play New England for what felt like the 7th or 8th time and lose the
game.
First round in the playoffs. But I guess that was to be expected when you had 3 weeks off. I mean, I'm glad MLS has learned from that. Like, okay, yeah, maybe the team that gets the bye shouldn't be off for 3 weeks, because when they play, they're going to be a little bit rusty. Because I remember the Union got knocked out the first game, and then the following year, New England won the Supporters Shield and got knocked out by New York City in penalties. And then the following year, they changed, like, all right, a week is all you get for finishing first, which is the way it should be. Like, 3 weeks, come on now, like, that's punishment. Like, you kind of feel like, all right, maybe I shouldn't finish first in the East or win the Supporters Shield because I'm being punished with this much time off. But that's neither here or there, and I'm sure we'll find something to complain about this year with the new playoff format, which feels like every single team gets to get into the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a huge fan of the new playoff format. I see why Apple wanted to expand it, because playoffs are very exciting and everything like that. But I just there's always an intensity to, like the one-off winner go home sort of mindset, that always makes the games interesting to see. And even back to like the 2020 season, I heard that entire season was crazy. And I guess it's, unfortunate, like you mentioned, the New England versus Union game. And I remember being so excited for that game and thinking the Union were going to do so well. And it was like one of the most flat games I think I've ever watched of soccer. I remember, one of the first times I was able to go home and visit my parents during COVID, just for safety reasons, of course. And then I remember just being there. I'm like, oh, cool, let's watch this game. And it was just awful, like absolutely terrible to watch. I remember Martinez had a knee injury. Kai had some sort of like nagging injury as well, that like this, they neither of them could run properly, and they absolutely just fell apart the whole game.
Yeah, and started from like the first 10 minutes of that game. It was like chance after chance, I feel like, from New England. And the Union lost that game 2-0, I want to say. I don't know. I try to erase that game from my memory because it's like, man, we were all so excited. They played well in MLS's back. I think made it to the semifinals, and then they were just dominating at home at Subaru Park, went undefeated, not blowing teams out like they were last year, but like keeping clean sheets, winning 3-0. I guess that's a blowout in soccer, right? And then you get New England, and yeah, like you said, completely flat. I mean, these fans, these newer Union fans, we talked about it at the beginning. They're lucky that they get to see this kind of soccer from the Union now. And if losing MLS Cup, if that's the worst pain you get to feel as Union fans, then you guys are doing well. Even though, yeah, losing again, fourth time we'll bring this up. Losing MLS Cup, that was painful. But
were you in LA for that? Did you make the trek out there, or were you Subaru Park?
I was at Subaru Park. I think that's because you were there too. I think that's the first time I met you.
You are right. I'm sorry, I forgot. Yeah, no, that was yes, I do remember this now. We did meet there on the field. Getting to sit on the field and it being a free event, families getting to come. That was a ton of fun. I remember when Jack Elliott, I think, got us ahead with his second goal of the night. I was crying, and I remember running over to Billy and seeing Billy crying, and I was like just tearing up slightly. And as soon as I saw Billy crying, just waterworks, man. I just gave him a hug. I was like so excited. Obviously, you have to keep bringing it up because it's very depressing, but at the same time too, it was it was definitely like. I think that whole season and the whole adventure of that entire game was definitely I look at it fondly just because it was an exciting match, and it was cool, and I think it was really brought the city of Philadelphia to pay a lot more attention to the Union, which is something I still have tons of friends that live in the area, which I will go see. And now friends will ask me how the Union are doing. I see them. My mom chimes in and watches games, which she never did before. She watched the MLS Cup final and just so many other things that she really are just people of the city feel like they pay so much more attention to it now. So it definitely was a positive, and I'm glad that they have another a high passion sport outside of the other big four that they can pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think Philadelphia Union are definitely doing a good job now to get Philadelphia to be a 5-for-5 city and not a 4-for-4 anymore. And I, I mean, as much as losing that final hurt and everything, like I think of the positive moments you talked about. Billy crying once Jack Elliott scored. I remember just running around mental, just hugging random strangers. Like people were like high fiving, people were going crazy. It's like, man, we have 2 minutes and we're finally gonna win a trophy. And then once I went into penalty kicks, I knew it was over. Like all the momentum was with LAFC, and then once Gazak slipped, I was like, our best penalty taker. And then you see McCarthy, Lord Helmet in the goal. You're like, of course, this guy was big in 2015 against New York Red Bulls, came up, won a penalty shootout against them. He's going to do it against the Union, isn't he? And yeah, sure enough. Sure enough, he does. But yeah, those 2 minutes of joy just running around that stadium. I mean, and even before that, like being on the field, like that was crazy. And seeing, I don't know, I would guess anywhere between 10, 15,000 fans. Maybe it was more because everybody was on the field. I feel like, yes, they had the bowl open and people could sit there, but once you said you can sit on the field, everybody's taking advantage of that. And it was kind of cool to see that many fans come to Subaru Park with the Union not even being home. Like that's something I think is always going to stick with me. And you can say, oh, Philadelphia is not a soccer town. I mean, you get 10 to 15,000 people in a stadium where the team's not even there. That's a soccer town to me. And it was a magical season. Hopefully that's something that we can experience this season. I didn't even have this in my notes, but I know this answer and I'll ask you anyway. Have you traveled to any away games?
Oh wow, great question, Todd. I almost like I was about to bring that one up. I actually was dying for a little bit of a solo trip, and I was like, let me just go to LA. The Union are playing out there against LAFC, and my whole story was kind of crazy because I thought the game. I flew in on a Tuesday, and I thought the game was on a Wednesday, and this was bad planning on my part. So I'm kind of putting myself on blast. But so I get in, and I'm like, oh my god, the game's tonight. I have to rush to my hotel, which was up in Burbank, which takes about 7 hours, and to get there with LA traffic. And then I was like, cool, game starts at 8:30. I should be okay. And then I'm like, wait, no, the game starts at 7:30. Like the time was listed wrong on my ticket. And so I'm like, go up to Burbank. I don't even have time to shower after a long day of travel. I'm just changing. I'm getting another Uber. I'm going back down to the stadium. And then next thing you know, like my ticket's not working because like the away fans had to go to will call. You get a separate ticket, and then whole big thing. I'm like eating a hot dog while I'm trying to like talk to the will call people because I haven't eaten like all day. And so I finally get into the stadium. I make my way to the away section. Give AFC credit. It was absolutely a gorgeous stadium. Like full credit to them. I think what they did with that stadium is beautiful. I love how the supporter section is just the entire side of the stadium. Even it's not realistic for them to fill it out every single game, but it was a pretty cool moment when you saw the entire supporter section doing like the jump chant when they were all jumping together, and it was a really sad game to watch. The trip ended up being worth it because I love being in LA. I would never move there, of course, for various reasons, but at the same time, it was cool getting to go there and do a little solo trip by myself. But just like getting to go there for the game was a ton of fun, and I'm really just like getting to travel for the team was very exciting, and it's something that I really want to do for future games, and it makes a good excuse to travel to various cities that I wouldn't really have a normal reason to go to. So I was thinking of going up to Toronto for the Toronto away game, but I'm going to be out of the area that weekend, so I decided not to want to go. But yep, since I live in Baltimore, I've been to a bunch of DC United games. I've actually unfortunately saw the Union lose there one time a few years ago, but I was there. I think it was the 6-0 blowout that was in DC United Stadium, and that was crazy because I remember looking around and I'm like, wow, like it's about 50-50 split of Union fans and DC fans, and that was not what I was expecting whatsoever. And looking over at the Sons of Ben away section, then they're going absolutely crazy. Just big fan. So
yeah, that stadium emptied out really fast. Like once, because the Union were up, I want to say 4-0 going into the half, something like that. I don't know, maybe 3-0, or maybe it wasn't that. I don't know, but I just remember in some point in the second half, like all the DC fans started leaving that stadium left and right. Like they had seen enough. Like their team had just lost at Subaru Park 7-0 to the Union, and now they're losing this game by 4 goals. Like they have been through enough. So it was actually 2-0 at the first half, and then the Union poured it on in the second half. Julian Kranzler getting the hat trick, and a little bit of a 50-50 call because I remember this now because Mikhail Uhre gets fouled in the box, and it's like, okay, I can see this not being a penalty, and they wind up giving the Union the penalty. And now, of course, Daniel Gazak converts it, so the Union go into the half 2-0. And then right at the start of the second half, Julian Kranzler scores. And that's when the DC fans started getting super frustrated. Then once Julian scored the fourth, they were all out of there. And then you could hear the Sons of Ben chanting "Our House" in the middle of DC. Yeah, that was pretty epic. So hopefully that happens this year. You going down to DC this year?
Yep, that is my plan. I think the game is on the 26th, I believe, and I think I'll be making a few friends and I will be going down for it. It's actually funny because all of my favorite away games that I've ever been to have actually been at DC United Stadium, because the first away game I ever went to for the Philadelphia Union was the DC game. I think they won 5-1 against DC. Was when Wayne Rooney was on the team. So cool getting to see him play, of course. And it was when Bedoya scored and he ran over and grabbed the mic and then gave a little statement about ending gun violence and like gun reform in the country. And I remember being like, not really knowing a ton about the union. I'm like, wow, why did you just grab the microphone? And then like seeing on Twitter blowing up everywhere, and I was like almost in the shot for that camera when they did the videotape of it. So I was like, that's so cool. And like getting to do that was like awesome. And like seeing them win was super exciting. I remember, this is kind of a throwback now, because I remember Marco Fabian, when he was still on the team, walking over to take a corner kick, and he was just so lazy that whole game. And I remember just screaming at him to like pick it up or not being such like a slouch or something like that. And I was just trying to like heckle the Union player. All the DC fans were like looking at me so confused, and I was like, he does this. It's fine. He just needs a little, he needs a little encouragement every once in a while.
Yeah, he does. I'm so glad Marco Fabian's not in the Union anymore. I mean, we'll always have that cross that winded up being a goal against New York Red Bulls, giving us our first playoff game, but. Yeah, I mean, it was not one of our fondest signings. And if you're going to go out and sign a Mexican international player, I don't suggest signing Marco Fabian. But yeah, I mean, going to away games is super fun. And same thing for me. I mean, that's why I went to Colorado. Like, I know I have a ton of friends that go out and snowboard in the winter, but I have no desire to learn how to ski or snowboard. And I'm like, really have no reason to go to Colorado other than to see the Union. And then when I got out there, I'm like, okay, I'm going out to Colorado like every year, regardless if the Union are playing here or not, because of how beautiful the state is. And then walking around the city was pretty fun, going to the Broncos Stadium then, Coors Field where the Rockies play. And then I got to the Denver Nuggets basketball stadium. Didn't walk around the stadium because I was like, man, by this point I've already walked like 8 or 9 miles. I need to go find something to eat. And so I didn't. So maybe next time I can complete all 3 stadiums next time I'm in Colorado. But yeah, I encourage Union fans all the time. If you've never been to a Union away game, I mean, you heard Nick's experience going down to DC. You heard him about LA, and that game he was talking about was the Emerson Leagues Cup, the CONCACAF Champions League, the second tie. So yeah, we all know how that one ended, but it sounds like you had a great experience regardless out in LA. And um, hopefully if we do play LAFC again this season, I know we play them at home, but if we meet in the playoffs, hopefully it's at Subaru Park. But if not, then I should probably take a chance and go out there, because I heard that trip last year was enjoyable, regardless of the Union losing that game. But the story is travel to see the Philadelphia Union away. You won't regret it. But let's talk about the season. So 23 games have been played so far in MLS, with 11 more to go for the Union. And as things currently stand, the Union are in third place in the East with 40 points, 3 points behind New England, who were won 43 points. And Cincinnati have 51 points in first place. They also lead the Supporters Shield standings, where the Union are fourth in the Supporters Shield standings. So you had a lot of fans, I remember, back from March 18th through April 15th. The Union, during those 5 games, did not win a single game. They went 0-3-2. And fans were panicking, saying, oh, this team, you know, they got lucky last year. They didn't take advantage of how everybody's having career years, and this is going to be a team that barely makes the playoffs. Like, people were in full-blown panic mode, and we had only played 8-9 games in MLS at that point. We're in the semifinals for CONCACAF Champions League, and fans are panicking this bad. Me personally, I wasn't panicking, but what about you, Nick? Were you afraid at all during that stretch? Were you afraid at any point during the season that, hey, this Union team don't look as good as they were last year?
Yeah, I was telling Todd when he invited me on the podcast that I am low soccer analytics, high passion. So I've definitely had my moments where I'm like, oh, this is frustrating to watch. I was like, wah. And then I remember it was the home opener, the 4-1 win against Columbus. It's the end of the first half. They just started so flat. And if Gazak didn't score the penalty, I might have booted the player. I might have been considering booing the players as they were walking off the field. You know, not to revoke my my season ticket membership or anything like that. But yeah, I've definitely had moments where I've looked at the team and been concerned. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of my concern has stemmed less from how the starters have been performing. You know, there's definitely been moments where you're like, oh yeah, you know, like Glesnes has had like a bad string of games. Kai has been injured. You know, like the top 3 have just not really been meshing super well. But I haven't had a ton of worry within like, you know, the core 11. But a lot more of my concern comes from like the lack of depth, or, you know, Jim not really wanting to like rotate as much. I think, you know, there's tons of players that I've wanted to see. I just want to see, like, you know, Torres play. You know, I want to see, you know, Perea play. And even like their moments if they don't fit perfectly in the system, you know, I'm not a coach and I will never judge Jim Curtin's, you know, decisions or understand bringing a player in. But I was like, if you bring these players in, I really just want to like see them given the opportunity. And especially with Torres too, I thought the whole principal idea of bringing Torres in, who's traditionally much more of a winger, plays on the right side, was having like, you know, late in games, going down to one striker, whether it's Kranz or Ua, and just having Torres play more as a winger on the right and being able to like cut in and play. So I'm getting on a tangent. I apologize. But I wanted to see more use of the depth, because you definitely see the core 11 definitely, you know, falter and have moments where they just aren't as strong. And so I think a lot more of my concern has come from the amount of depth the Union have and then how they are using that depth. But yes, I've definitely had moments when there's been a string of games I've been like, you know, but there's a little bit of, you know, the CONCACAF hangover, and there's, you know, just a string of bad games in general. But if I could, you know, quantify my worry so far this season, I would probably say I've had like 25% of the season I've been worried about like how things are looking, and 75% I'm like, oh yeah, they'll figure it out. No time at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you look at 23 games last year to 23 games this year. The Union last year were at 45 points, they're at 40 now. But both teams had 12 wins at this point. Now, the difference is the Union have not looked great on the road. They have conceded a lot of early goals. How many times I've talked about that on this podcast? They've conceded 10 times on the road this season, which is tied for the most in MLS. Montreal's also tied with them. So, I mean, this team is getting it done at Subaru Park. Now, you can argue and say, well, no, they're not, because they lost to Orlando and they didn't lose last year at Subaru Park. Okay, point taken, but it's only one loss so far this season. And I'd be shocked if the Union get another loss at home this year, just because they're so good. And the atmosphere in Subaru Park, Jim Curtin talks about it all the time. And the players too in the locker room say, hey, look, they're the reason why this place is a fortress. They're the reason why, when we feel gassed, when we feel like we don't have enough, they're pushing us on. And you saw the late push this weekend against New York City. Chris Donovan scoring a huge goal, his first MLS goal. And that was just a hard fought play. He had no reason to score that goal, but he kept the play alive. He's fighting for the ball. New York City have a miscommunication, and their miscommunication is a gift for Chris, and puts it in the back of the net, won't score an easier goal. And so, I mean, is this team the same as last year? No. And a big part of that is, to your credit, the depth. And I think if there was any point this season where I was annoyed, it was coming to the realization that, all right, Joaquin Torres probably isn't that guy. I mean, I never thought he was going to be a starter on this team. I always thought that he would be like an El Seno-esque coming off the bench. And, if you're down, you need a goal, he can be that difference. If the game's tied and you're trying to go for the win, he can be that guy. And it just seems like no matter where the Union play him, he doesn't fit in with this team. And like you said, he's a winger. And that's part of the reason why Montreal got rid of him, because Hernan Losada doesn't play with wingers. He plays with wing backs. And Joaquin Torres does not do the defensive work that Hernan requires of his wing backs. And so Montreal was willing to let Torres go. And the Union had a ton of GAM from previous sales. And so you got to put that money to use. And we haven't really seen Ernst Tanner explore the MLS market before. And so why not take an opportunity on a Joaquin Torres or an Andres Pereira? And neither player has come good yet. I feel more comfortable with Andres Pereira than I do Joaquin Torres, just because, he's, yes, a defensive midfielder. And yes, he'll never take the starting spot from Jose Martinez. But the Union could as easily go to 2-6s. I don't see why Andres Pereira can't play as an aide. And I go back to my conversation with Jim Curtin in January at the coaching convention. He said, yeah, Andres has the ability to play as a 10. Something's obviously happened there where he's not getting his chance. And maybe it's the coaching staff saying, hey, look, he's not understanding our pressing cues, because I think that's one thing that fans don't understand, is that it's a very complicated system the Union play. Yes, you see people just running like chickens out there, but you got to know when to press. You can't just press, because Jim Curtin said it a couple times this season, and he singled out Julian Kranz saying, hey, look, Julian went when he shouldn't have went, and now that messes up our shape. And it's as soon as one person doesn't do their job, now the whole thing falls apart. And we've seen that a couple times this season, especially when the Union are giving up goals. It's like once one person's not on the same page, then those other players are trying to pick up for their mistake. And now that's when things start to go crazy. And so maybe that's part of the reason why Andres isn't playing. Again, we've asked Jim Curtin, no answer from him. And, it's not on him to say, okay, yeah, this is why. He can just... I think part of it is he's probably protecting the player too, because how would a new player feel where they're coming to a new team, learning a new system, and the coach says, yeah, they're just not getting it. He says that to the public, and now the confidence in that player is gone. So maybe it's the same with Joaquin Torres, but I do agree with you. The depth's probably a little bit of a concern, which brings me to my question to you. I mean, we just saw the Union sign a South African center back, 19 years old, as a U22 initiative signing, first ever in club history. Do you think the Union need to make more signings?
Yeah, so this the tons of thoughts, as we're talking, and one of them is sort of going back to like Chris Donovan. Congratulations, Chris. I was actually first time ever sitting in the Sons of Ben section. My good friend Ethan actually went to high school with Chris, so so when he scored the goal, like he created that goal, and that's what we should be expecting for one of our strikers. Is it was his press, it was his pressure. He dribbled to create the opportunity, and I was terrified he was gonna miss it when he had the open goal. I'm gonna go ahead and be honest, but congratulations to him. It was really good, and you really could have heard. I think people around me probably heard me screaming in a very high pitched voice when he scored the goal because it was so exciting. Also, I was right there with Ethan as well, who's known him since growing up. But I think my quick answer is yes. I think the Union, have a lot of quality players, like I said, within the core 11, but outside of that, there is like a little bit of lack of depth, especially if you look at like striker, for example. It's probably one of their like key needs during this transfer window. And Chris is a good player. I'm sure he's a really good kid. He's quick. He does not have the quality finishing, and I'm not sure if that's his technical ability or just his nerves playing at this level, really, for his first full season. But he is no Corey Burke, and we can he's go back to MLS Cup. But it was when Corey came out injured, our press changed, our tactical flexibility changed, our speed up top changed. So there really seems to be a high need for another third striker to come in because if the system didn't really work with Torres filling in as that third striker and then Donovan really playing as more like this the centerpiece target striker, we're kind of up in the air about what we can really do when it came to our striker, especially if we play in a 2-striker system. They really do need like the 4 to rotate through somewhat consistently. And I saw that the Leagues Cup roster came out earlier, and I am excited to see some of the academy players. Not that they'll play consistent playing time, and the U2 players that came up. I think it was Nelson. How do you say his last name?
Nelson Pierre.
Yeah, yes, yeah. As soon as you said it, I was like, I've heard you said his name properly before. Came rushing back. But I'm excited to see him if he gets some starting minutes. Right? You want to see tons of like homegrowns and academy players come up through the system. But at the same time too, I would love to see the Union pull in another striker. Just add a little bit of depth, give us a little something different. Just sign a young striker because obviously like Uwa is 28 now, I believe. And he's not going to be with us forever. So I want to see them bring in like a younger striker like Carranza that they can sort of mold to the system, develop and then sell high in the future. That's definitely my preference with the Union system in general. Outside of that, if Kai Nabizo leaves, then we have so many open questions about who's going to be playing what position. But so figuratively, if just Kai leaves, I want them to bring in like a young left back. I understand that Matt Real has a lot of his limitations and weaknesses, but at the same time, I do think he is a decent option for like in a temporary space. I think there might be a little bit more of like change and flexibility about what side they're going to be attacking down for the time being if he was to be a consistent starter. But at the same time, I would like to see them bring in like a younger left back that they can, similar to Kai from like a lower division, European league, that they can like develop properly, teach the system, and then sell high later on. Something along those lines. When Bizo leaves, obviously I agree with you that you were saying. I was listening to the podcast earlier today, actually, that I think Nate, is a good backup, and I think Nate, is going to fit into that starter role very easily. And then bring in like a young, someone to sub in consistently as well if Nate was to take the starting role. Outside of that, and the Union fans are a little bit spoiled in the way that like the diamond is such like an interesting midfield system because you really have just like, your set number 10 and your set 6 in my opinion, but those like 2 8s never play as like a traditional 8, but there's like moments where it's like when you have your wingbacks pushing up, that they push into play so centrally, more like a central midfielder, which fits like Jack McGlynn's ability levels. And like so it benefits Bedoya a ton too. But then there's like moments where they have to play so far out wide that they're not a traditional 8. So it's so hard to find players that fit into that system, in my opinion, the more I've been like just watching them play over the past few years. And I think Leon Flock is so interesting in that regard because he's traditionally a defensive midfielder, a number 6. He loves playing as a 6, especially when he has a partner. But at the same time too, he fits the 8 role decently well because he just has that flexibility of playing as like, a wing back, a defensive midfielder and so many other roles as well that he just fits in that role. So it's so hard to find, but if they could find someone who's played in a diamond system before that can play as an 8 versus bringing in a player and taking a gamble to see if they fit the system, would definitely be preferred and would give us so much more flexibility in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to Andres Perea. I mean, Orlando City play in a 4-2-3-1, two defensive midfielders. And now it's a little bit different going to a team that plays with a diamond. And again, going back to, okay, it's narrow. And again, going back to learning the pressing cues. And maybe that's part of it. But, I feel like if that was part of it, would Jim Curtin tell us? Maybe. But again, maybe Jim Curtin feels like that's bashing the player, throwing him under the bus, and there goes his confidence. But me personally, I wouldn't think that is. But, Jim's the coach. I'm not. And fans are annoyed with not getting an answer. But I don't think, no matter how many times people try to ask that in the media, I feel like all of us in the press conference, whether it's midweek or after the games, have given up trying to ask that question because Jim Curtin's just not going to give an answer. And, he doesn't owe us a answer to that. I mean, he just doesn't, as hard as that is to accept. And some fans might give me crap for that, but nobody can hold a gun to Jim Curtin's head and say, "Hey, tell us why Andres Perea is not playing. What's the real answer?" Like, no, like it's fine. But with a diamond, you do need you need midfielders. You need a ton. And I would say you talked about wanting 4 strikers with you rotating strikers up top because you play with 2 strikers. That is a very good point. But I would say the most important, and I'm sure you would agree, is you want to have at least 6 midfielders because we see Bedoya picked up another quad injury. He's getting older. You want to see players that can rotate in and out where they can flip sides like we saw against New York City. You want to see players that don't have just one specific skill set. And you can never have enough midfielders. And I'm sure, again, I'm repeating myself now, but it does come down to learning those pressing cues, learning, all right, when Julian Kranzer presses, where do I press on the field? When do I go? Who do I mark? All the little stuff that maybe we don't always see that they're training hard in practice. But we all know, what you do in practice doesn't always translate to what happens in a game. You can try to emulate a game in practice, but it's not always going to work out that way. But yeah, I do agree with you. And again, going back to the initial question I asked you, were you panicking? Hopefully fans aren't panicking it now. I mean, I honestly don't think there's a reason to panic. Maybe fans are pissed looking up that Cincinnati has 51 points. I mean, Cincinnati are on a record-setting pace this year. Only 2 losses all season, 15 wins already. Like, I mean, they are on fire. And I would say, and I'll put on my record right now, if the Union and Cincinnati meet in the playoffs for the final in the Eastern Conference and Cincinnati host, I don't think I would be intimidated going to Cincinnati. I mean, I've been there once, and it was a decent crowd. And now, granted, playoffs, I'm sure, is a different story. Like, we know at Subaru Park, like, the regular season crowds have been good, but once you get into the playoffs, like, you're getting up there in noise level with the Eagles, I would argue. Now, some fans might say, no, not a chance, but Subaru Park does get extremely loud, and you feel that whole stadium shake once the Union score a goal. And we felt it last year against Cincinnati with Leon Flock. We felt it last season once Julian Kranza scored the go-ahead goal against New York City. So Subaru Park's a fantastic place to go and watch playoff soccer. But I would argue it's a great place if you guys haven't been there yet. Definitely take advantage of that. But do you want to see the Union sign another striker? And I thought about this too when I was talking about, the Union just signed their first U22 signing. Why not go in and get a young striker? It wouldn't hurt, right? It's not going to go against the salary if you use a U22 player. So maybe the thinking was Jose Riasco, who they signed a couple years ago from Venezuela, I think at the age of 18, 19, and he's just really not getting a chance with Union 2. Doesn't look like the player they thought they were getting.
Yeah, I've been meaning to tweet at Jonathan Tenenwald because I know he'd be a little more in the loop, but like what happened to Riasco? Like I do check the U2 rosters when they pop up on my Twitter, and I just happen to run into them. But like he hasn't been starting. He hasn't really been on the bench a ton. I'm not sure if there was like an issue if he was playing in like a different tournament or if he's injured, or like what really has been going on with that. But back to Cincinnati, hat off to like Pat Noonan and Chris Albright. They really have just done a phenomenal job with that team, and it's obviously you want to see the Union be the best team in the league, but at the same time, it's really it's exciting seeing so many Union alumni be that good though. So and it's really is exciting getting to see that. But yeah, back to the depth, and which I think is so interesting about like the diamond midfield as well, is that if you can play as a really good 6, I feel like you can play as a really good 8 in the system, right? So we've seen like Leon Flock, who potentially could play as a 6, not my preference in the diamond formation, be able to play on the left side. And you've seen like, Bueno as well, who's been flourishing recently, just who's able to just go play as the 8 in the system. And I did notice against the game this weekend against New York that when Bueno came in over Bedoya, there was a little bit less of an attacking prowess at that point. And so really my preference would be, is because we have so many defensive minded midfielders, is that we bring in like an attacking midfielder. We really have not had a pure attacking midfielder since Jamiro. Yeah, and which is really sad thinking back on it. Or even El Senior, I would say too, if he's going to play, as an 8. But I would love to see them bring in a player that is specifically like an attacking 8 that can play on the outside of the diamond and just open it up, especially, if Kai was to leave and we lose a lot of like crossing prowess, if Kai is no longer on the team, who can just come in and really just create opportunities on and off the ball as well.
Yeah, you're definitely going to need that. Once Kai Wagner leaves, I would assume the thinking is the Union do not want to lose Kai Wagner and Bizo in the summer window just because they're making that playoff push. And it's a lot easier for them to replace those players in the winter when the season's off than mid-season. And that is something I'm sure Ernst Tanner and the coaching staff are thinking about, where if we lose Kai Wagner, we lose all of our attack on the left side of the field. Leon Flock doesn't give us the attack that we get with Kai Wagner. Jack McGlynn doesn't, I would say, give us the attack that we get with Kai Wagner, just because of how wide Kai gets, how, for the most part, his crosses haven't been great this year, but still, I mean, we saw it against New York City. We saw it against Nashville, the cross leading to the penalty into Daniel Gazdag. So not many players on the team can cross the ball as good as Kai Wagner. And if you lose him on the left side of the field, it's a big miss. And hopefully that doesn't happen this summer, but we shall see. I guess since we're talking about the season, and then we're end the podcast on Leagues Cup, which is, yes, my favorite topic.
I had a whole joke planned when you introduced me to be like, wow, I'm so excited to be here to talk about Leeds Cup. I know Todd's been talking about how excited he is for so long and never got to it. So
yeah, I've had a couple people actually text me and say, yeah, I can't wait to come on the podcast, or I want to come on to the podcast and talk about Leagues Cup because I know how excited you are. Like, I mean, we're talking about it. If people like, I'm going to watch. Like, don't get me wrong. If I gave the impression that I'm not going to watch League Cup, of course I'm going to watch Union games. I'm just not going to drive an hour away to go up to Chester. I mean, I'll go this Saturday, but after that, I'm not driving up on a Wednesday at 8 o'clock at night, getting home 1 o'clock in the morning. And those ride backs, like, they're tough, especially with construction on 95. It feels like midweek. Like, there's no chance I'm going up to watch a meaningless game on a Wednesday.
If you want a little secret, I'm not sure which parking lot you park in, but lot J, there's a little back exit. You can go right around and loops right to 95, have it down to a science at this point. The second I get in my car, it's usually like an hour and a half and I'm back in Baltimore. It's like, don't know how I figured it out, but it works so well now that I don't even mind going up on a Wednesday anymore.
Man, now you just give away a secret, and now watch that. Now watch people listening to this podcast take advantage and say, I'm going to park in lot J now, and now they're going to all take your idea, and now there's no easy way out. So, I mean, the one thing that helps me is, staying after and doing the press conferences and going in the locker room. By the time all that stuff wraps up, stadium's pretty dead, and I have no problem getting to the highway. But by the time all that ends, it's around like 11 o'clock at night. So now you're not getting home till 12. So, I mean, I would much rather do that than waiting in my car and just waiting for traffic to die down. It seems like traffic, though, is a lot better than what it was parking in lot B or lot C in the past, where you're parked all the way near the waterfront and you're just waiting for all these cars to empty out from the front parking lots, and there's nothing you can do, no place you can go. But parking in lot G, at least you're closer to the road now. But I haven't really experienced that too much with staying after most games. But what are your predictions for the rest of the season, since we've been talking about the season here for a majority of the podcast? I mean, the Union, they're a playoff team, right? Can they get a top 4 spot in third place? Like I said, right now, could they push for the top spot in the East?
I am not worried about them not making the playoffs. I do not think that is a bold prediction whatsoever. I think very safe to make the playoffs. I think that there is high potential that they could take the number 2 spot. And even depends on how Cincinnati, what they do in the summer transfer window as well, and like how they look the second half of the season. It's not unrealistic that the Union could fight for a top spot. I think the fight's a little bit uphill right now, unfortunately, just because of how good Cincinnati is, and it'll be a fun rest of the season to watch. I think they'll make a solid playoff run, and I'm not making any predictions past that. I'm gonna knock on wood even saying that. I don't want to jinx anything. I don't want to be held accountable if I say like, oh, I don't think they're gonna make it to MLS Cup or anything like that. So I'm making no bold statement outside of that, just to be safe.
Hey, that's fair. Looking at Cincinnati's schedule right here, once League's Cup's done, they come back in league play against Columbus Crew away. Then they have New York City at home, Atlanta United away, Orlando City at home, Philadelphia away, and they have Montreal away. Then Charlotte at home, Toronto away, New York Red Bulls at home, Miami away, which you would expect. That's probably going to be a loss. But I don't know. Maybe Messi doesn't save Miami, and then they end the season with Atlanta at home. So they have more away games than they do home games, and it doesn't matter where Cincinnati play their games. I mean, I know they have 4 wins on the road, but I do think I do think it's a tough task for the Union to catch Cincinnati. I mean, they're so good. They're so good. And you said it earlier. Shout out to Chris Albright and Pat Noonan and Sergio Santos, Ray Gaddis, and Alvis Powell. And I don't think I'm missing any other former Union players on that team. But
for all we know, there could be like 10 more Union players on the team. just missed the news.
Yeah, but they've been fantastic this season, and I don't see a reason why they're going to slow down. But top 2, I'd be happy with that. I mean, if they don't win the Supporters Shield, okay, that's going to be annoying because, you went out. Obviously, you're going to host the final at home. And I think we can all agree now, mentioning it for the 6th time in this episode, MLS Cup final, if it was at Subaru Park, the Union are probably winning that game. But finishing second wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But again, the new playoff format, it's dumb, The first set of games, you play you play 3 games. So each team gets a playoff game, and if it's tied 1-1, then goes back to whoever has the highest seed back at home. So I don't know. I mean, anything can happen with this new playoff format. So maybe it doesn't matter if you don't win the Supporters Shield, if you don't finish first in the East or the West. So let's go ahead and my favorite topic, Leagues Cup. So we know the Philadelphia Union take on Club Tijuana this Saturday, 8 p.m., and then Querétaro on Wednesday, July 26th. I don't know if you saw this, Nick, but CONCACAF yesterday, I believe it was, they released their rankings of all the CONCACAF teams in CONCACAF, and the Philadelphia Union are listed as the highest ranked American team at 8. LAFC come in on the list, even though they made the CONCACAF final this year. Yes, they lost to Club Leon. LAFC are at 11th. Philadelphia 8, LAFC 11. I was shocked by that a little bit because LAFC are the reigning MLS Cup champions. They had reached the final of CONCACAF Champions League this season, and CONCACAF believes the Philadelphia Union are a higher ranked team. Seem about right to you?
In my non-biased opinion, that obviously I don't have season tickets for the Union and drive up and have tons of apparel from them. Obviously, it makes sense. Of course, I don't know how they did the ranking, but obviously, it makes perfect sense in my brain. So, I know nothing about Liga MX outside of Club America, and so I was like, "Yep, other ones on top make perfect sense." But Union being at number 8, obviously, it's the perfect position for them. So,
yeah, we have Monterrey first, Club America second, Leon third, Tigres 4, Chivas 5, Pachuca 6, Toluca at 7, and then Philadelphia Union at 8. The only American club in the top 10. So I'm with you. I don't know how they do these rankings, but we'll take it. And
I think from what I heard is they take the number of Instagram followers for one of the team. They actually equate that into the calculation. So I think it makes sense. Miami's not a great team, but they got a ton of Instagram followers now. So that's the most important thing.
Let's see who else they're higher than. Miami's higher than St. Louis. I don't agree with that. Higher than DC United. If you're looking at the standings, probably don't agree with that. Higher than the Colorado Rapids. Okay, I agree with that. That's a god-awful team. Toronto, they're higher than. They're higher than Austin and Charlotte. And is Charlotte the worst? They might be the worst MLS. Yeah, it looks like Charlotte's the worst MLS team. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that is harsh to Charlotte to say that. Yep, they're worse than Miami. When you look at the standings, Miami's god awful. But you're right. Maybe they do look at the Instagram followers, and I'm sure part of that is the Messi effect. So we shall see. And we're talking about Leagues Cup. I mean, I guess it's possible, right? That Miami's god awful in MLS, but I mean, would people be surprised if they make it to the final, the semifinal, and Leagues Cup with Jordi Alba now apparently about to sign, Sergio Busquets sign, Leo Messi's there. So, I mean, this is a good team on paper, but how are they gonna gel? There's still a lot of bad pieces in Miami.
They don't need to gel. They're just gonna give the ball to Messi and he'll figure it out. So it's like I'm sure you've watched Ted Lasso. It's just a Zava effect, Just give him the ball and figure it out from there.
I've never seen Ted Lasso.
Wow, that's I know you have Apple TV because you have to watch it. You have to have it to watch MLS. So you would think you would just watch Ted Lasso at that point.
Nah, I just have the MLS season pass. I don't even have Apple TV. So to get the season pass, you didn't need Apple TV. So
I'm gonna send you my login so you can watch Ted Lasso. So
there you go. It's done now, right?
Thank you.
It's done, right? Ted Lasso.
Yeah, just ended. But I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm going to send you my login so you can watch Ted Lasso.
There you go. How many seasons? 3, 4?
3 in total. Yep. You'll fly through them because they're so good. So
I heard Jimmy Conrad's in one of the final episodes. Love Jimmy Conrad. So that might be what it gets to get me to watch Ted Lasso, just to find Jimmy Conrad in there. But people on the podcast now are probably bashing me that, wow, you've never seen Ted Lasso, and this was the number one show everybody's talking about on soccer Twitter, and you've never seen it. I've never seen it, and thanks to you, Nick, now I have to put that out there on air, and now everybody knows I've never seen Ted Lasso. Probably the only person that's never seen Ted Lasso.
Probably, definitely in the soccer world, I'll tell you that much. But I mean, it's also great too. I mean, I know you watch Premier League. I can't remember what your favorite team is, but it's just like they have like all the pundits from the Premier League actually on, and they have like Pep on at some point as well. It's like, so I know this is not what we're here to talk about, but somehow I always come back to Ted Lasso in every conversation I have now.
You're making a push for Ted Lasso for all of us slackers out there who have not seen it. We'll see if I watch it. But going back to the Leagues Cup, because I know, Nick, I know you want to talk about this. Are you excited for this competition? Because and all the listeners know, I call this a money grab. Are you excited for this tournament?
I completely agree. It's a money grab. I understand why the league agreed to it. And you better believe it came with my season tickets. I'm driving up on Saturday. But other than that, I will be watching the games at home. I don't plan on, doing much outside of that. But at the same time, I like it from the aspect, as a fan, and you mentioned this on the podcast before, as a fan, the more soccer games, the better, right? The more times I just have something built in my schedule, they get to sit down and watch, or drive up to Chester and watch, and see my friends and go to the tailgates and do all that stuff. Absolutely love it. But I completely agree for the players that the amount of games they have to play in a season currently, especially in the beginning of the season for the Union when they were still building up, their like endurance, was just absolutely insane. And so I think it is, like I said, it's great that as a fan, there's more games to watch, but as like a coaching staff, I couldn't imagine how they're thinking about rotation, how they're thinking about like recovery, and even just like the coaches themselves, right? Like being a coach is not an easy job. And so I couldn't imagine the amount of like time that they have to spend just like planning games out, and then also balancing, family life, and just sort of even taking time to like step away from the sport and just relax and decompress. So I'm excited to watch more soccer, of course. I'm really hoping the Union make a good run, just because they deserve to. They are a great team, but at the same time, I want to see a lot of youth come up and play. I want to see Pereira and Torres potentially get some starts. And in addition to that, I hope there are no injuries, because I would be very upset if there are injuries to any players during this tournament. That really does not matter when obviously MLS should be the priority.
I mean, there's no reason why Ali Badori should play in this tournament, right? I mean, Jim Curtin said it's a similar quad injury from the last one that he suffered. So, I mean, there's no reason to try to rush Bedoya back to play in this meaningless tournament. Just let Bedoya recover and just not play him at all during this tournament. You mentioned some of the younger players, so we'll go over the players that were included in this list here real quick for people that didn't see this on social media. And they are MLS Next Pro players: Andrew Rick, goalkeeper; David Vasquez, a midfielder that can play up top as well; and then CJ Only, who is a midfielder who is absolutely killing it with Union 2. He's 16 years old, has 6 assists on the season, 3 goals. And do I expect any of those players to get playing time? No. You also have Nelson Pierre on the list, who signed a Union homegrown contract, but the Union loaned him down to Union 2 for the whole season, making him ineligible for MLS minutes this season. And then you have Anton Sorensen, who also is on a Union homegrown contract, but there's no way the Union are playing that kid this season when you have Kai Wagner in front of Matt Real. And then we could play Leon Flock as the third left back if you really want that. We've seen Nate Harriel play as a left back this season, so there's no way that Anton was going to get minutes this season with the first team. But yeah, it is nice to see the Union call up some of these younger players. And some people might be saying, well, they don't have Union contracts, so how can they be up? Well, the League's Cup roster rules are different than MLS roster rules. That's why. And the League's Cup, they want, I shouldn't say want, it's a requirement that you have 30 players on the roster. So the Union filled all 30 spots by calling up some guys from the MLS Next Pro team. And it is cool when you look around the league at some of these other teams' rosters. They haven't announced a full 30-man list, which then would indicate to me that some of these teams are going to be announcing some signings soon. And Cincinnati is one of those teams, only called up 29 players. So you talked about earlier, could Cincinnati be on their way to getting stronger? Could they bring in another striker? I mean, I already know that they brought in one striker with Brenner gone. I don't know. Do they get an offer where I know they said, okay, well, we would want to sell Brendan Vasquez in the wintertime, not the summertime. I don't know. Money talks, right? If they get blown away by 15 million, of course they're going to say yes to that. They'd be stupid to say no to that. So maybe Cincinnati brings in another striker this season. We shall see. You have the normal subs, so you can have 5 subs, 3 windows. You can dress 23 players, which is the same for MLS. 3 yellow cards between the group stage and round of 16. And if you get the yellow card, obviously that means you're suspended for the next game. So I don't know. I think the Union are probably going to rotate a lot in this competition. Try some players out. Like you said, maybe Pereira, Torres, Adada, I would assume will get minutes. I know Jim Curtin says, yeah, we'll take this tournament serious, but I don't know. Like, I feel like this tournament, yes, there's CONCACAF Champions League spots up for grabs, but don't take it serious. Like, that's what I wanted. Just experiment with your lineups, with your players, but maybe that's not what Jim Curtin does. We'll see this Saturday what the first lineup looks like, tell you how serious the Union take this. What would you do? Would you go out there with your regular starting 11? Would you put a mix out there? What would you do if you're Coach Nick?
If I were Jim Curtin, I would make Bedoya go home and sit on the couch with a glass of red wine, like all he wants to do every night, and relax. He would see absolutely no minutes, and he probably won't be healthy enough to play anyway. Let's be honest. But at the same time, I would love to see. Blake still deserves the start, of course, because he's a goalkeeper. Doesn't need that much rotation. I would like to see, Matt get a start, Nate get a start. I don't think the new center back will be ready in time, unfortunately. I'm assuming there's visa issues. It's probably the safe bet with the Union. So I'm assuming, I would like to see, Damien Lowe get a few starts, just sort of general rotation. Also, like Pereira deserves a start, of course. Bueno definitely deserves a start at this point. McGlynn, he's 19 years old. That kid can go run like 20 miles and go run 20 miles the next day. You're 19 years old. You don't need any rotation. And then also, striker up top situation is, still up in the air. They don't have a ton of depth at that position, but I'd love to see Quinn Sullivan. Really, I think, the past few games, he's like cemented himself as the third currently, and, really has the ability to like open the game up and offer something different than Ua and Kranza, if we're being honest, with his crossing ability. So, just the general rotation at the 10, I really have no idea what I would do. Gazdak seems to be like he can play every minute of every game, but maybe they'll try and play through Gazdak and keep him in for at least the first 2 games or something like that and see where they're at in the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we shall see what the Philadelphia Union do this Saturday when we see you there, Nick.
Yes, I will definitely be up there. Like I said, it is free with my season tickets, and if it's free with my season tickets, I will most likely be at the game.
There you have it. Well, Nick, it's been a blast having you on here, and you caught it, right? Definitely went over an hour on the podcast, which I feel like is typical. I try not to, but it happens. But I feel like it's excusable when we have a guest on, which we have not had somebody on the podcast in a very long time. So, Nick, thank you for being the first person back onto the podcast and first fan that we've had on in a very long time. So I love doing this, learning how people got into the Philadelphia Union and just hearing their thoughts on the season. If people agree with me, great. If not, that's even better because I love when people have different opinions because maybe it's something that they bring up that I was missing and now they're making me think a little bit harder. And I think that's great for people to grow. You always want to see things not always from your point of view. You want to see it from other people's as well. So, Nick, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And where can people follow you on social media?
Oh man, I'm awful at social media. I don't even know my Twitter tag. Give me 1 sec to look it up. I have a photo of a funny dog on there. I'll tell you that much from like a running gag from before. Give me 1 second. It's literally Nick, and then the number sequence is 657-30357. So if everyone's got that written down, go ahead and give me a follow on Twitter. So don't actively use Instagram or anything like that. So Twitter is probably your best bet for any soccer content.
Yeah, when I saw this follow, I was like, this is definitely a fake account. Like, you definitely know people have fake accounts when it's just a whole bunch of numbers coming across the screen. But glad to know you're a real person, Nick.
Yeah, definitely gotten some flack from several people, and they're like, "Oh, like what's your Twitter account?" And I have to like literally memorize the numbers to show it to them. But yeah, man, thanks for having me on. This absolute blast. Definitely every time I see the notification that a new podcast stuff on Spotify, I always get excited and I'm excited to listen to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So if you guys aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow Free Kick Pod, wherever you get the podcast, The Free Kick, the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Free Kick Pod. And be sure you follow Nick on social media. I can confirm he's a real person. You're not listening to a fake robot or anything. I can see Nick here on my screen. I know you guys can't since we don't do a video for the podcast, but Nick is 100% a real person. I've met him in person, and he's always at the Sons of Ben tailgate. So if you guys want to meet Nick, definitely see him at the Sons of Ben tailgate. But probably not going to have a review episode, honestly, for the Tijuana game. So next time you guys hear from us on the podcast, hopefully we'll have another fan on the podcast, and if they want to talk about the Tijuana game, then so be it. We'll talk about that. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.